caught up with your homework. So that's got that handed back to you. You have some workbook assignment for me today. And instead of being on intervals, it's on triads. We had just started talking about, introduced triads last class. And we had talked about the 4 types of triads that we have in music, and those would be the augmented, the major, the minor, and the diminished triad. We talked about what internal intervals they contain, what outside intervals they contain, and we looked at how to construct or build these triads given one of the members of the chords. What are the 3 members of the triad called officially?
The root, the third, and the fifth.
That's right, the root, the third, and the fifth. You bet. So it was on pages 19 and 20, selected exercises, I believe. And I would like to collect this page, but before I do that, let's see if you have any questions or concerns about any of the problems that I have assigned. So section A, I think I'd ask you to do just numbers 1 through 7. And section B, the first, was it 15? Okay. And then section C, I asked you to do all of that. And then section D, just the first 15 there. Okay, any questions on any of those? How to spell any of those triads that are indicated? Good, wow, okay. That's perfectly fine. Are you ready to make sure your name is on it and tear it out and hand it in? I'll take it if you want. It's going to be a good project. Thank you. Yes, no? No, okay. You can bring it to you later today. All of the class periods that we spend on triads are, well, I mean, all the classes we spend are important, but all the classes we spend on triads, I think, are very interesting, super duper important. And we're going to learn a lot more about triads today, especially how to rearrange the notes of triads, rearrange the notes. Up to now, we have been notating all triads with the root as the bottom or the lowest tone. And that makes sense, because that's kind of the standard arrangement for a triad. Kind of the default arrangement where we can identify all the constituent parts of a triad with the least amount of trouble. So for instance, one of the triads that we should know now is the C major triad. And that is listed, or that is notated with the root as the bottom or the lowest tone. So for instance, here we have, once again, I'll go ahead and mark these. The bottom note is known as the root. The middle note is known as the third. And the highest note is termed the fifth. Called the fifth of the chord. Those are the 3 members. Now, in actual music, the way composers actually use triads, any member of a triad can appear as the bottom note. Any member of the triad can appear as the bottom note. So the way composers actually use these is in such a way that, well, in this case, C is the bottom note. Well, what they can do is they can rearrange the notes, and they can move the C up higher such that another note, another member of the chord, in this case the E, is the bottom note. And triads can be used in that position or that arrangement. Likewise, there's one more arrangement of the notes. You can move both the C and the E up above, higher than the G, so that the fifth of the chord, or the G, remains the lowest sounding pitch of all. Okay. So because any member or any note of a triad can appear as the bottom tone, a triad then can have three possible arrangements, each with a different note on the bottom. Makes sense, right? If there's only three tones in a triad, each one gets a chance to be on the bottom when we rearrange the notes, then there's three possible arrangements. Now, when the root of the chord is the lowest pitch, lowest sounding pitch of the triad, as is shown right here, we say that the arrangement is called root position. Something that I'll probably mention several times today is that the root position of the triad is the only position or arrangement of the triad in which all of the notes are stacked in thirds. The root position of the triad is the only position or arrangement in which you can be guaranteed to know that the root is the lowest of all sounding pitches of the chord. The middle note is the third, and the highest note is the fifth. I kind of think of root position almost like its home position. If you had a default or a standard way to understand or recognize triads, root position would be the standard arrangement. But when I rearrange the notes, and we have the arrangement such that the third of the chord is the lowest sounding tone, or the lowest pitch of all, this arrangement is called first inversion. You see, when we rearrange the notes of a triad, the members of the triad do not lose their identity. In the original root position triad here, C is the root, E is the third, and G is the fifth. Well, in this arrangement here, E is still the third, G is still the fifth of the chord. The members don't lose their identity. C is still the root of the chord, but it just so happens how they are arranged is that E, the third of the chord, happens to be on the bottom. And when the third of the triad is the lowest sounding note of all of them, we say the triad is in first inversion. It would make sense, wouldn't it, to just say when the third of the chord is on the bottom, we could call it third position. But again, music is littered with inconsistencies. So instead of being called third position, we call it, when the third of the chord is on the bottom, we say the chord is in first inversion. First inversion. Okay? And the final arrangement is the arrangement such that we have the original fifth of the chord, the G in that case, that is the lowest sounding tone of all. And when the fifth of the chord is on the bottom of the arrangement, we say that the triad is in second inversion. Second inversion. I guess I could show it here. This is the because the pitches of the original triad and root position are just rearranged and they're not changed, all of these chords that I have on the board are considered C major triads. They're all considered C major triads because they all still have the pitches, the three pitches, C, E, and G, which are necessary to make up and define a C major triad. So they're all considered C major triads even though the pitches are rearranged. Note, however, that it is only, again, I've said this, the root position is the only position in which the three notes are arranged in stacked thirds, and the root is the lowest tone. Do you see how this arrangement, what we call first inversion, not all of the notes are arranged in stacked thirds? These two are, but these two are not. The G up to C is a fourth. And in this arrangement, do you see how not all the notes are built or stacked in thirds, I should say? Because G up to C is a fourth. It's only the root position arrangement where you can be guaranteed that they're all going to be nicely, neatly stacked in thirds, and then the root will be on the bottom, the third will be in the middle, and the fifth will be on the top. That's the only arrangement or position you can be guaranteed to find out. And so when we start seeing chords in different inversions, triads in different inversions, what we're going to have to do is kind of rearrange them in our mind and think about them as if they were in this arrangement, as if they were in root position. So we can start understanding what the root of the chord is, what the third of the chord is, and what the fifth of the chord is. There was something else I was going to say about these, and now I forgot. But I suppose if it's important, then it'll come back to me. Incidentally, where is, okay, I've talked about how the root is on the bottom in root position. Where is the root, where does the root happen to be in this first inversion? Yeah.
The top.
Yeah, it's on the top, right? Because the root is C. It just happens to be the highest note in this arrangement. Okay. Where is the root in the second inversion?
The middle.
It's in the middle, yeah. It just happens to be in the middle in second inversion. But what's important to note about inversions, first inversion and second inversion, is that the upper notes of any arrangement here, of any triad arrangement, can be spaced in any way as long as the lowest sounding note does not change. So let's see if I could give you a different kind of illustration or example. If I have this, and I were to play that sound with those three pitches on the piano, it should sound like this. You see how these three notes, if you rearrange them in your mind into stacked thirds, the only way they can be arranged into stacked thirds is to have C on the bottom. And this is still what's called a C-E-G triad. It's still a C major triad. If I asked you what bass position or what arrangement is this C major triad in, which of those three, root position, first inversion, or second inversion, would you say?
First inversion.
First inversion, that's right. And do you know why we would say that?
Because the third is on the bottom.
Because the third of the chord is the lowest sounding one of all, that's right. See, when it comes to triad, well, I think I remember what I was going to say. Because there are three notes in a triad and they're different arrangements, we call each of these things, we call them bass positions. Bass positions. Okay. Because when it comes to chords, yeah, it matters what notes form the chord, but really for analysis, what is most important about a triad and a chord is which chord member is in the bass. That cannot be overestimated enough. When we analyze triads and seventh chords and other types of harmonies in music, Yeah, it's important to know that all the pitches that form the chord, but for analysis purposes, we label them based on what note of the chord is in the bass. And so, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but now this is probably at least 8 years ago now. Well, maybe not that long. Maybe, I don't even know when it was. But anyways, it's true. When that, I don't even remember her name, that singer sings, it's all, thank you, yeah, all about that bass. It's really true when it comes to triads. That's the most important piece of information we can identify about a triad. So that we can tell not only what kind of triad it is, but what arrangement or what bass position it's in. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter how the upper notes are spaced. As long as the third of the chord is the bottom sounding note, you're guaranteed that that chord or that triad is in first inversion. First inversion. It actually doesn't matter either how many duplicates or triplicates of the notes of the chord there are. For instance, I could do this. Let's see here, what am I missing? Oh, I forgot a G. I could do this if I wanted. It doesn't matter if I've got chord tones doubled or tripled or quadrupled. It doesn't matter how they're spaced. As long as I have just the notes C, G, and the third of the chord is the lowest sounding tone, we say that it's a C major triad, and it's still in first inversion. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is when you rearrange notes of a triad, you have a lot of freedom. I mean, as long as you keep the same pitches of the root position, a lot of times you can just kind of toss them up above, just throw them up there. All that matters, though, for our purposes, is which chord member is in the bass, which is the lowest sounding tone. Whatever chord member is the lowest sounding tone of all, that determines the bass position of the triad, whether it's root position, first inversion, or second inversion. Sometimes it's hard for students to, well, not to understand it, but sometimes it takes a while for it to sink in. That we're not, I mean, we're concerned about these notes, yeah, because we need to know what notes form the chord. We need to know if it's a major triad, a minor triad, or an augmented triad, etc. But after that, it just depends on which member of the chord, the root, the third, or fifth, is on the bottom. That's the ultimate, that's the main point here, I guess. Okay? So, in sum, the bass position or the inversion of a triad is determined only by what member of the chord is in the bass, not by what chord members are in the upper voices, not by how the upper notes are arranged in the upper voices, and it doesn't even matter how many upper notes there are. It just depends on what member of the chord is in the bass, and that determines a chord's ultimate bass position, or what we call inversion. They kind of mean the same thing. Okay, let me move on for now, unless there are some questions. Keep this in good time. In addition to identifying a chord's bass position as root position, first inversion, or second inversion, musicians also use numbers as a shorthand way of indicating the three bass positions. So we're going to go back and we're going to use more numbers, kind of like we did in the first unit, with scale degrees, and certainly with interval sizes, and with time signatures. Numbers appear all the time in music. Can't do music without numbers. Anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is musicians use interval size numbers, or interval sizes, for each of the notes above the lowest sounding pitch to indicate the bass position of a triad. Let's see if I can, maybe I'll rewrite some of those first opening ones there, over here, to show you what I mean. Okay? Let's stay with the C major triad. If I asked you what bass position is this triad in, I hope you would notice a root position, because the three notes of the triad are stacked in thirds. That's always true about root position. But I guess what I'm also trying to tell you is that there are some number symbols or numbers that we can use to signify or also indicate the three base positions. In other words, we don't have to write out the words root position, first inversion, or second inversion all the time. In fact, hundreds of years ago, ink, ink that composers and musicians used to write with, there was not an infinite amount. So sometimes composers had to indicate to the performer what bass position the triad was in just by using numbers. And the numbers refer to the interval sizes of the notes above the lowest tone. Okay? So, how far, just the interval size by the way, not the modifier, how far above the lowest tone C is the E? What interval number?
A third.
It's a third, okay? How far above, again, the lowest tone is this highest note here? What interval size?
5.
A fifth, right? G is a fifth above C, E is a third above C. So it turns out that the number, like the abbreviation or the shorthand number symbol to indicate a root position triad are the numbers 5, 3. And what do the numbers refer to again? Well, they just tell you the interval size of how far above the bass, the lowest note, each of the other members of the chord are. That's all they do. So I hope you see where we're getting these numbers. Now, when I write a triad in first inversion, as I have over there, again, we can signify or indicate first inversion with a set of numbers. And the numbers just tell me how far above the lowest tone the rest of the chord tones are. How far above this lowest tone E is a G? A third, right? But how far above the lowest tone E is the C?
4.
Recalculate.
6.
A sixth,
Oh,
right?
sorry, I counted from the
Yeah.
second up.
Yeah, go from always from the lowest tone. So E up to the C is a sixth. So it turns out the number symbol to indicate a first inversion triad back in the day and even down to the present year is 6, 3. The number 6, 3 always refer to a chord or a triad in first inversion. So that means the numbers 6, 3 tell us, well, if the triad is in third inversion, if the triad is in first inversion, which member of the chord is the lowest sounding tone of all, the root, the third, or the fifth? The third, right? We've got to start associating these things together. First inversion, which means 6, 3, means that the third of the chord is the lowest sounding tone, or the third of the chord is the lowest pitch of all. All right, last but not least, the final bass position or arrangement. When a triad is in second inversion, let's see what interval size numbers result or come up to indicate the second inversion, that particular arrangement of a chord. From the lowest tone, G up to C is what interval size? A fourth, right? And again, from the lowest tone, G up to the highest note, E is what interval size? A sixth, right? G up to E. So it turns out that the numbers 6, 4 are an abbreviation or shorthand way to indicate a second inversion triad. And again, a second inversion triad means that the fifth of the chord is on the bottom. Okay? Let me pause here for a second. Are there any questions about how we have 3 total bass positions? Root, first, and second. Any questions about the chord members and where they end up going to when you rearrange the notes? Any questions about where we get these interval numbers? This is, I can't overstress the importance of this information. This is what musicians deal with and use every day of their lives, basically. It's so, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is so practical if you're going to be in music, as a profession. It's so practical. Okay, now, I mentioned that hundreds of years ago, composers didn't have a lot of ink when this number system developed. So, believe it or not, and I don't know, maybe it's because they ran out of ink or maybe because they were lazy, I have no idea. But they actually shortened or abbreviated these abbreviations even further. It's like, it's not, like it's really hard to just write the numbers 5, 3, 6, 3, or 6, 4, right? Well, they shortened those labels, those number labels, even more. So this is what they ended up doing. To indicate a root position triad, sometimes they left out the 3, and they just used the number 5. And that was enough, sufficient information to indicate a root position triad. Because these other base positions don't have 5s in them at all, right? Okay? And to indicate a first inversion triad, again, some composers and musicians omitted or left out the 3, and just the number 6 itself refers to a first inversion triad. Now you might say, well, how can that be? Isn't there a 6 over in the second inversion symbol as well? And the answer is yes, but the way that they distinguished the first inversion from the second inversion is they didn't shorten this number symbol at all. They always kept it as 6, 4. So I'm trying to gradually take you through the step-by-step process, but what this means is that the number 6, 4 always refer to a second inversion triad. The number 6 by itself means a first inversion triad, and the number 5 by itself means a root position triad. And then finally, again, maybe because they were, I don't know, they just didn't want. Finally, some composers and musicians, they didn't even write the 5 at all. They just actually didn't write any numbers, period. And so if you have no numbers underneath a chord or underneath a bass note, that referred to a root position triad. Nothing at all. And that was as far as they were able to shorten or curtail their labels. So the full symbol for a root position triad is 5, 3. The halfway symbol is 5. Actually, no numbers at all are needed to indicate a root position triad. When it comes right down to it, technically, you don't have to write anything to tell me that a triad is in root position. But the minimum requirement to tell me that a triad is in first inversion, you have to use the number 6. The full number symbol is 6, 3, but you only have to just write the number 6. And finally, to tell me that a triad is in second inversion, you have to write both of the numbers, the full symbol 6, 4. Okay. Now, keeping track of different bass positions of a triad and locating the root in these various arrangements, it can be confusing at first. I understand. Maybe to some of you not so confusing, maybe to some of you very confusing. But once again, we can always go back to something that we know, and that is, it's important to keep in mind that the root position of a triad is the only bass position in which the notes of the chord will be stacked in thirds and their root is on the bottom. So there's always kind of like a fail-safe, something that you can always fall back to and rely on when you're confused about what you're looking at, when it looks like a bunch of notes are just kind of haphazardly rearranged and you don't know what triad you're looking at. If you can rearrange the notes in your mind or write them down on a piece of scratch paper in such a way that all the notes are stacked in even thirds, then you know that that's root position and you can tell what the root is because the root will be the bottom one in that arrangement. That's guaranteed. Okay, let's look at some of these bass positions this way. We know that in root position, the root is the bottom note of the chord. But in first inversion, we know the third of the chord is the lowest tone, but how far above the lowest tone in first inversion is the root? give me an interval size. In first inversion, how far above the base is the root? Where's the C, in other words, in this first inversion arrangement? How far above the base?
6.
It's a 6. So whenever a triad is in first inversion, the bottom note is not the root, it's the third of the chord, but you can always tell where the root will be. You just go up a sixth, and you'll know what the root is of that chord. That's another way to find out some information that is very helpful. And finally, in the second inversion bass position, we know the fifth of the chord is on the bottom. How far up do I need to go to find out what the root is? In other words, how far is the C above the bass note in this arrangement? What's the interval? A fourth, right? So when you're looking at a triad in second inversion, you know the fifth of the chord is the one on the bottom, but you'll know that the root is always a fourth higher. The root is always a fourth higher in a second inversion triad, and sometimes that will be the only information you can glean on and gather in order to find out and identify what kind of chord you're dealing with. Okay. So, and I can't stress this enough either. In order to recognize or identify any triad, just arrange the notes into stacked thirds, like the root position there. Because you know the root will be the bottom note then, the third will be the middle note, and the fifth will be the highest note. Okay. All right. Any questions yet? I'm going to start to go to some examples to show you how to apply all this information. Okay, let me make some space. Just to kind of show you some of the things you're going to be asked to do in your homework assignment for Monday. Okay, let's start with an exercise or a task that asks you to do something like this. And I'm going to have to get another marker, especially for next week. These things run out of gas. Speaking of, not having enough ink. Okay, so for this chord here, for this triad, what I want you to do is I want you to help me identify the triad according to its root and type, and then identify the bass position, and then notate the correct bass position symbol. Oof, that's a lot of information. I'll see if I can go through that slowly for you once again. Okay, now do you see how these three notes, are they stacked all in nice neat thirds?
No.
No, they're not. So is that triad in root position? No, it's not. Okay. Let's see here. So what we need to do is we need to, if you can in your mind, maybe I can do it on another step. Can you rearrange those three notes, the B, the G, and the E, in such a way that they could be stacked all in nice neat thirds?
If you put E on the bottom.
That's right, if you put E on the bottom. Okay? Let me write that out. Because we got a B, a G, and an E, and look, if you put E on the bottom, then they're stacked in thirds. So because I know that, which of these three tones is the root? The E. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put that down here. That's part of the homework. You're going to have to identify the root of the chord. Well, the root of this one is E. Okay? Now, help me identify the arrangement or the bass position. Is this triad in root position, first inversion, or second inversion, and how do you know?
It's in first inversion because it's a sixth. The root is a sixth above.
Okay, that'll definitely work. How about we can also say it's in first inversion because the third of the chord, which I can determine from this mess, well, it's not a mess, sorry. But the third of the chord, when I have it stacked in root position, I see the third is the lowest sounding tone, right? So that means it's got to be in first inversion. I think that's a better, stronger way to identify what bass position is it in. Well, it's in first inversion. Why? Because the third of my root position chord, the third is the lowest pitch of all. Here. And when the third is on the bottom, that means first inversion, always and forever. Okay? What else can we determine about this? Let's see here, we're taking kind of base positioning. Oh, I did forget. I skipped one. What type of triad is this? Is it augmented, major, minor, or diminished?
Is it minor?
It's minor, yeah. EGB is a minor triad. So we can identify that about the chord as well. And then last but not least, what is the correct number symbol or base position symbol to signify first inversion?
6.
That's right, just a 6. You can write 6-3 if you want, but you don't have to. So it looks like some of the things on the homework, I'm going to be giving you a triad, and I'm going to ask you to tell me 4 pieces of information about that chord. The root, what type of triad it is, major, minor, augmented, or diminished, what the base position is, root position, first inversion, second inversion, and then what the base position symbol is for that base position. Now maybe you can start to see the purpose of why we spent all that time talking about all that information. Because you really need to use all of it. Your mind needs to get used to thinking about chords in this way so you can identify things like the root, the type of chord, the inversion, and the base position, that kind of thing. Okay, let's do another one. I wonder if I'll get a little more. I can try another color. I'm not guaranteeing that this is going to be that dark, but just for the sake of variety, let's try a different color. I've got 3 different pitches. In no particular order, there's a B, there's a G, and there's a D sharp. First of all, I need to rearrange those notes in my mind or on a piece of scratch paper to find out then stack them in thirds. If I can stack those 3 notes in thirds, then I know the lowest note of that arrangement is my root. And I want to find out what the root is first. Can anyone tell me what the root of those 3 notes is?
A G?
It's a G. Yeah. And the reason is because, again, if I'm in treble clef, the only way I can get those 3 notes stacked in third is to put the G on the bottom. Right? G, B, D sharp. Okay. So G is the root. Oh, maybe I'll leave that there for a second. What type of triad is it? Major, minor, augmented, or diminished? It's augmented. Very good. Yeah, that's right. G, B, D sharp. So we're going to identify that it's an augmented triad with a plus. What base position is it in? Root, first, or second? Second. How do we know that? Well, because the 5th of the chord, which we know from this arrangement, that's on the bottom. So it's second inversion. And now I got to get rid of this so I got a little more space. What is the base position symbol, or the number symbol for second inversion triads?
6-4.
6-4, that's right. There you go. That's all the information you need to know pretty much about this chord. See, it didn't matter that, it didn't matter that the G wasn't right here, or the B, it doesn't matter how they're arranged. It just depends on what is the note of the triad that's in the bottom. Okay. I think I'll have to go back to the black marker again. Let's try another one. In no particular order, I've got C flat, A flat, and F. Looking at the spacing of those notes, the intervals that they're stacked in, is that chord in root position? Yes, it is. Hey, we don't have to do any maybe rearranging or thinking in our mind. Everything is what we see is what we get, right? We know if it's stacked in thirds, that the bottom note is the root, the middle note is the third, and the highest note is the fifth. Well, good. Let's start filling in the information. What is the root of this chord then? F. What type of triad is it? Major, minor, augmented, or diminished? Diminished, good. I would agree. So I'll indicate that with a circle. What bass position is it in? Root, first, or second? Root position. I'm just going to write root here. And finally, what number symbol, or what symbol do I need to use to indicate root position? Which one? 5. What were you saying?
have to.
Yeah, you could write 5, you could write 5-3, you could just leave it blank. You don't even have to write any number to indicate root position. Don't worry, I'll know what you mean in your homework. Okay, we've got to try a few others here now. Keep an eye on the top. Let's do this. Still in the treble clef. I would like you to help me notate that specified triad in the proper bass position. All I'm giving you is F major, and then I'm giving you the number 6 or 6-3. What does the number 6 or 6-3 mean? Which bass position?
Second inversion.
First inversion.
First inversion, that's right. Maybe before we write it on the staff, my final answer in first inversion, can we just figure out what notes we need and write the chord in root position maybe on scratch paper? How do you spell an F major triad in root position?
FAC.
That's right, FAC. So, FAC. I know that this is a major triad, because, F to A is a major third interval, and A to C is a minor third interval. And I know that this is root position, because they're stacked in thirds. But this tells me that it wants it on the staff not in first inversion, not in root position, but in first inversion. So, which of these chord tones, the F, the A, or the C, has to be put on the bottom? The A, the third of the chord. So my final answer for this one is going to be these notes were just arranged to just ensure and make sure that the A is on the bottom. See that? I've got FAC, but now with A on the bottom. That's all you need to do. I think I've got another one here. Let's try this one. Help me notate this chord in the specified inversion. E minor triad 6-4. Well, think of how you would spell an E minor triad in root position first. That's what I do. And if you need a piece of scratch staff paper while you do your homework, that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Can anyone tell me or think of what the notes of an E minor triad would be in root position from the bottom up?
E, G, B.
E, G, B. That's right. E, G, B. Okay? Well, if the triad in root position is E, G, B, I'll use those notes in my answer, exactly those notes, but which one has to be on the bottom for 6-4? The fifth of the chord has to be on the bottom. So that means which one, the E, the G, or the B?
B.
The B has to be on the bottom. And you can notate it down here, I don't have enough space, or just as long as you got a B on the bottom, and the rest of the notes are above, you're good. There is, have you ever heard of the phrase, like if something spooks you out or gets you a little bit afraid, have you ever heard of the phrase the heebie-jeebies? Well, the E minor triads, especially around Halloween, they give me the heebie-jeebies. requested. Okay. Now, your homework assignment for Monday is in two parts. And the first part is you gotta do portion of one of the pages out of the workbook. It's workbook page 23, just numbers 1, 2, 6, 11, 12, and 15. Those are the triads, and that's in your assignment sheet. That's on page 23 in the workbook. And then, in addition to that, I've got a handout for you here to complement and give you more comprehensive practice on triads. So it's this handout plus those few problems in the workbook. And this will be for Monday. All right, have a good weekend, everyone. Oh. I don't know why. Sorry about that. Yeah, okay. No, you're fine. Good.